Oh, hi, everybody.
Hello.
Okay. And hi,
Was I
Phil.
supposed to speak?
Yeah, no, yes, you were, of course.
Okay.
Well, I was kind of doing the thing where you pretend that you're kind of like, oh, didn't see you come
Oh,
in.
hi. You
Hi,
just caught me
hello.
doing a podcast.
You
How are
caught us
you?
podcasting, as we always are doing in the podcast minds, and we're tired. No, listen, everybody.
Around the clock. They don't let me sleep.
We don't sleep. We're generating ourselves for AI, so we never have to actually make a podcast again. We just get those sweet, sweet AI dollars. So, it's late August. It's summer. We've just dropped about 18 episodes of Die Hard on the Blank since we started doing the show in December. And we're going to take a little break. But because you're starved for our voices, Phil, what are we doing?
We're going to re-release the Origins of Die Hard episode, which was one of our early episodes.
Hi, everybody. It's Liam. I'm interrupting the podcast because we forgot to include our customary tagline for each episode when we recorded. So here it is. It's Rambo in a towering inferno. Okay, back to Phil and I. See you later.
Not many people will have seen this, I think, because it was most people saw Die Hard and then Roadhouse, and then they kind of skipped this one. It's not a clip show. I want to be very clear about that. It's not a clip. It's not a clip.
It's not a clip show.
We will be back. We will be back. But not many people actually are aware that we did this episode. So it's really interesting. We get into the book that Die Hard was based on, Nothing Lasts Forever. We analyze that. We talk about how the similarities, the differences, some of them are really fascinating. We talk about some of the films that have influenced Die Hard, such as Towering Inferno, First Blood, Taken of Pelham 1, 2, 3. And we also play the Die Hard games and the quizzes and all of the stuff that you've now come to expect and hopefully enjoy in the subsequent episodes. So we're just taking a one episode break.
Here's a quick, I just thought, if I may, just a quick Double Jeopardy trivia quiz for the audience.
Ooh.
Phil knows the answer, but Liam and Phil got together. I'm doing your voice.
Oh, I
Liam
like it.
and
Yeah, I
Phil
got it.
Got together to record this episode. How many times had they met before recording this episode in person? The answer? 0 times, and that's the chemistry. That's what we have.
Sometimes it just clicks.
That will they, won't they? They will. Yeah. Oh my God, I need to be stopped. Have a happy rest of your summer. Enjoy this episode. We will be having mojitos. We're fiends for mojitos. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the episode.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome back to the party, pals. This is Die Hard on a Blank, the podcast where we explore the influence of Die Hard on action cinema, one action movie at a time. I'm Liam Billingham, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Phil Gothorn.
No relation.
No relation. But Phil, I feel like it's less of a Special Agent Johnson, no relation thing than a Al Powell to your John McClane.
Right. We're bonding across the airwaves.
You're making fun of my donut Twinkie habit,
There's
my
Twinkie
driving.
wrappers everywhere
it's
here.
Disgusting in here. It's just,
And yet you're oddly lovable,
And
just like Al Powell.
there's something charming and charismatic about me. It's great.
Yeah, very much so. So we're into that dynamic.
It's feeling good.
Yeah.
Feeling good. Right.
Yeah,
We're gonna
yeah.
get really closer as you get glass in your feet.
Exactly.
It's gonna be great.
We'll start to admit our vulnerabilities as time goes on. So so last time we talked our way through Die Hard scene by scene in our comprehensive analysis. Today we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to talk about Die Hard's DNA, the origins of Die Hard, the other movies and books and other elements that influence Die Hard. And we're also going to talk about the key elements that are critical to the success of any action movie, the anatomy of an action movie, if you like, which Die Hard illustrates perfectly. It's like full marks in every category.
How many elements? I mean, this movie is sort of the thesis of the show, right? So how many elements, what are the elements that make an action movie?
So in my opinion, my humble opinion, the key elements are the hero.
Don't be so humble, Phil.
Well, it's
Phil.
It's the default
You
setting.
don't have to
I'm a Brit. What are you?
You
We're not allowed to not be.
Yeah, you can't. You can't be proud for sure.
No.
Tell me what these 6 elements are.
Well, in my not so humble opinion, they are
Thank you.
the hero, the villain, the premise, the ticking clock, the action, and the humor. And if you get all of those elements with high scores, then I think you're onto a winner. And Die Hard, I would say, is pretty much full marks in every category.
Sort of the OG.
Yeah.
The top dog.
Yeah, it's sort of patient zero of this action movie genealogy
I don't know if patient
project.
zero is the language we want to use, considering the past few years of our
maybe
lives.
not.
Outbreak, good movie. Let's get right into it.
I want to move into a section that I'm calling Anatomy of an Action Movie, where we talk about the key elements that I think are critical to the success of any action movie.
How many are there?
There are 6 that I have identified. Number 1, the hero. Number 2, the villain or villains. The premise, okay, the setup. The ticking clock.
So that's like the thing that propels the story forward?
The premise would be, what's our launch pad for it? But, almost every action movie has some kind of ticking clock, so we should talk about that.
So is it like a bus that can't go below 50, for example?
Some begin with the ticking clock, or in this case, the ticking clock kind of towards the third act.
Got it.
The action itself and the humor, which I think is an important element. So why don't we start by talking about the hero and about what makes John McClane so appealing? Why has this character caught the public imagination?
I don't think you can dispute the importance of Bruce Willis in the part. I think he's just really likable and smart. I mean, that's the thing. He's got street smarts, whatever that means, right? And like Bruce Willis has a great, as an actor, always, and maybe this is, I think it's hard to distinguish sometimes between Bruce Willis and John McClane. Bruce Willis and this character have like a great bullshit meter. I think there are a great sort of like our great entry point into the story because we like him for a myriad of reasons we've already listed. He doesn't sit in the back of the limo. He is suspicious of all authority around him. He feels like a regular person, whatever that means. And part of that is just like you watch him thinking about the things he's thinking, and I feel like most of the time in the movie, I agree with his takes on things.
It's also interesting how he could be so, and this was unique in the climate of, the rise of Stallone and Schwarzenegger and to some extent, Chuck Norris and those type of action stars. This was unique at the time because there was a vulnerability and an everyman quality to this character. He wasn't a muscle-bound Superman.
Right.
He was a regular guy and caught in the wrong place. Another thing, though, I think that's important to mention just about this is the blue-collar thing. But when John McClane enters the building, again, this is what we're talking about with nuance. He gives the security guard, the second one, he gives him a little nod as he's walking through to the elevators. And
right.
I was just thinking about that moment. It's a seemingly inconsequential moment, but I was thinking like, those are his guys. They're probably ex-cops,
right?
Especially the older guy. Whereas when he goes upwards, ascends to the highfalutin executives and their cocaine and their materialism and their questionable ethics, he doesn't feel comfortable. He's a bit of a fish out of water.
One thing I thought you were going to mention, and is that when he walks into the building, he walks up to the reception desk and he says, "Hi, I'm here for Holly McClane," and the guy says, "Just punch it in on the computer screen there," and he kind of goes like, "You're fucking kidding me. Like, I have to..." And he goes and he's like sort of like hesitantly punching it in. Like, this is a guy who's like, no, you just talk to a person and that person tells me where to go. Like, that's a human interaction. And it feels like part and parcel with the late 80s with like the rise of computing software and this kind of like stuff that we all take for granted now, digital life, that like...
He's a bit of an anachronism.
An anachronism.
Yeah.
But also, I think him nodding at the security guard is a little bit like, that's a human being. Like, the humanity in that. And like... No way Ellis makes eye contact with the reception person.
He would see them as furniture.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas McClane sees them as people.
And I think that is, he's like, in some weird way, and it feels a little antiquated, he says to Ellis, or he says, "Hans, this guy doesn't know who you are, but I do." Like, he really is, he knows who not to trust. He knows who to trust. I mentioned this earlier. When he finally gets upstairs, he's so withholding to Takagi, who's like, Takagi's being a nice guy. Like, he's being welcoming. Like, he knows there might be some tension between him and Holly. And like, at one point he says to him, like, "Can I get you anything?" And McClane goes, "No, thank you, I'm fine." And there's so much like
He puts
resentment.
the drink down as well, I think, doesn't
He takes a sip
He's
of it.
kind
He's
of
like, "Yeah,
what's
yeah."
that?
I
was
do
that,
love that
by
he
the
like
way?
takes this shitty cocktail and takes a sip and goes, "Nope, it's not for me," right?
I've never met a cocktail I didn't like.
Yeah, and I think that he just
It's all illustrating how like Holly's probably financial situation and status is vastly superior to his, and it's probably like salt in the wound for him.
Right.
You know, like, oh, look at all this opulence. And, you know, so he is kind of coming in with his arms folded and being like, fuck
and he's
these
a
LA
flawed
douchebag
protagonist,
people.
right? Like he's like you said before, like there's something a little caveman-esque about being like, my wife makes more money
He's a
than
bit
me,
chauvinistic. in it,
absolutely,
right?
totally. But I think that is more interesting than an unkillable machine like Schwarzenegger is in Commando to some extent, which, by the way, is not a diss of that movie in any way, but like this movie, and I gotta...
It doesn't exist in the real world.
Right, exactly.
But whereas Die Hard feels like it could exist in the real world, albeit slightly heightened. It's all on a sliding scale.
But you're still watching a movie about a guy surviving every second at like it really is a movie
He's
about survival.
flawed, but we like him. You know?
And he has a bullshit meter that I think is really strong.
It's a good point. So that's our hero. Let's talk a little bit about the villain brackets villains.
Right.
Why do we love Hans Gruber? Sub-question, is Gruber the GOAT?
I was saying this to someone the other day. I think Alan Rickman is maybe the best part of this entire movie. I really, really think so. And I think that this relates to actually McClane and Hans are really, really similar guys. And I think that beyond their cunning and beyond their wit, I think they're similar because they have the same distrust of authority. I think, for all the reasons we labeled before, McClane looks at money and he looks at wealth and he goes like, oof, this is not my world. Whereas Hans is trying to take that wealth away from the people that have it. And also, I love so much how he has no beliefs. His beliefs are, I want to be rich, sitting on an island, earning 20%.
Very 80s.
They're so incredibly
80s sensibility.
80s. And I feel like maybe in the 80s that was kind of scary, but now it's like kind of refreshing that this guy isn't like a zealot or a lunatic.
And it's one of the things that, you know, McTiernan adjusted about the character, and we're going to get into the book, and the Gruber character features in the book and actually is a zealot, you know, is like Baader Meinhof, Red Army type, has a very specific political cause.
Right.
Whereas, you know, McTiernan making him this kind of 80s
apolitical
aspirational yuppie.
Right.
Who was just like, yeah, you know what, like, but he's also has a weird, like, is almost satirizing the corporate culture because he's like, these bearer, I didn't know what bearer bonds were until recently.
No one does. They're just an 80s trope. They don't actually exist.
And they're in heat. They're in heat as well. They steal them from their security
Are they in Lethal Weapon
truck.
2? No, those are Krugerrands.
Krugerrands.
Right.
Diplomatic immunity. Sorry if I just blew out the mic, but I can't hear Lethal Weapon and not
Where's that
do
gun from? South Africa?
So, another future episode.
The best.
But so the bearer bonds, but essentially it's kind of like the crypto of its time,
right?
In the sense that they're untracked and it's basically shady.
Right.
You know, hence why in Heat, they're stealing it from criminals and they try and sell it back to them because it's not something that has value in a conventional way.
Right.
Gruber knows that this company, and again, this is the book leans into this a bit more, are not an ethical company and are up to some pretty shady shit, even if Takagi seems, you know, somewhat of a noble
character.
And
there's a little bit of critique in that. And again, it's the 1980s, it's the Wall Street era, like this sort of, and again, you know, this is why McClane, same guy.
Yeah,
McClane is suspicious of this because I think he's just like, this is all bullshit. And I think it's
a house of cards.
And there's
right?
Again, it's that class rage that I think existed in that period. It's like it always does. And I think like you can feel that in the movie totally. I think the other thing that is hard to deny, and I can't believe it, is Alan Rickman's first movie. But they cast a Shakespearean actor to deliver heightened dialogue, to give a speech about Takagi's history and be menacing. Like, it's a really strong use of a theater actor in a movie because Hans Gruber is a little theatrical at times, especially in those early moments when he's talking to Takagi and kind of, you know, trying to bring him in and gesture and like play this role of like, I'm a terrorist.
It's interesting you say that because now that it's just making me think about the idea of like street theater, which is like a police, a kind of, a principle of like undercover work, or essentially you're acting in a theatrical way for, a different agenda. And actually a lot of the characters are playing roles at different times. And obviously the Ellis scene, there's an element of theatricality to that. Hans is grandstanding that Holly calls him out on later. He's trying to almost show to Takagi, like, I could be a corporate executive.
Totally.
Like you, I'm smarter than you. I'm smarter than
and
any
he
of
plays
you guys,
having an ideology at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
The thing, and he says, like, I forget exactly what he says, but then he says, "You'll all be witnesses." And
he's almost like a priest sitting there with his book, kind of preaching to the
right. And you notice none of the other terrorists talk to the hostages beyond telling them to get back.
That's right.
Like, he really is the ringleader, and they sort of like position him as this suave figure who can talk to them, which, by the way, is a great contrast to Carl, who's a elegant bruiser, because Hans can't be the guy. In a fight with McClane,
he's not
Hans
physical,
is going to get his ass kicked,
he's not.
right?
He's not physical. It's all intellectual. He doesn't need to get his hands dirty. I believe as well there was a version of it where the characters turned up. They were in like overalls and stuff, or in early iterations of the script. But I think Rickman lent into this idea of like, no, Hans Gruber doesn't get his hands dirty. He has minions to do things for him. We should be in suits,
right?
Or at least I should, because I'm not grubbing around and
there are interesting dichotomies.
To do that for me.
Not to talk very briefly about the villains, right? Like you have Carl, who's dressed all in black.
Well, to just frame this conversation, if I may. Who's your favorite terrorist?
My favorite terrorist, it's a tie between Theo and Marco.
Marco, no more table?
No more table!
Yeah, he
what a psychopath.
He nails his scene.
He's amazing.
Don't shoot!
Right.
That's such a brilliant piece of like theater.
Yeah.
Because he's signaling his friend who's coming behind him, I'm about to be shot.
Right.
He's saying, don't shoot, so that
moment is
Heinrich
so frenetic and scary too,
yeah, it's
right?
a great moment.
It's a great movie.
Drop the gun, motherfucker. It's pretty intense. Yeah, no, I'm a big Fritz guy, who's the guy with the
long-haired guy.
The long hair. Kind of reminds me of Jonathan from Queer Eye,
I can see that.
Great
He's also
hair.
kind of the most 80s of the.
It feels like I imagine Fritz's backstory. He's like, look, I know we've got to go and do this Nakatomi thing, but I need to get the hair done first.
I also have an audition the next morning to play a bit part.
He's a model.
Movie.
I imagine he's like got a bit of modeling. I need to look good. So he kind of looks like he just stepped out of the salon. So I think I've got shout out to Fritz, but for me it is Theo. Like he's
the best.
Every scene, just as you said, charisma to.
He's very casual. He's great. He's also kind of establishes this thing that happened in the 80s, whereas like whenever there was a group of like bad guys, there was always the nerd. But Theo's a cool nerd. One of my favorite little details is when the SWAT team is coming in, he's quarterbacking it and telling them what to do, and he's just kind of like chewing on some potato chips or something like that. Like, it's one of my favorite, or he's eating peanuts or something. Like, there's just something really, really
It's
cool.
interesting you say the quarterback thing, and he even says the quarterback is toast. He's kind of like a defensive coordinator.
Right, exactly. That's a better way to think about it.
He's got the earpiece, he's like calling the plays, like, this is what the offense are going to do, this is how we're going to counter it.
It's so good.
It's just brilliant. And he's like, the hacker kind of became a real trope in the 90s and has continued to this day. And in fact, even Die Hard 4 has it's about hacking.
Right.
So there's several hacker characters, but this is like one of the most original takes on a hacker.
He feels like a really established character, and you think he's going to be a bigger part of the movie than he ends up being because he plays such a big part early on in the movie. The other henchman that I have to do a shout out to, if only because of 80s action movie history, Al Leong as Uli. Al Leong also plays Endo in Lethal Weapon.
We would be remiss if we didn't give him props.
Mel Gibson.
Right.
And also is in Big Trouble in Little China. So, like, three of the best action movies of the 80s by far, and just like an important guy, like a quintessential. Oh, I recognize that guy. He also has the great moment where where the police are about to come in, as I recall, and he leans on the counter, and you realize he's at the like snack counter in the lobby, and he takes out a candy bar and starts eating it. I've always loved that moment. Again, it's these little character beats.
That's what we're saying. These tiny nuances that are so entertaining, you know. And yes, I love that moment. I know a lot of people do. So that's our villains covered. And yes, I personally do think I think Gruber is the GOAT.
Right.
I actually think he is the greatest, not certainly the greatest action movie villain. of all time. There's some great villains that we're going to
Right.
talk through, but I also think he's in the argument for the greatest movie villain period.
I think he's up there.
You
Yeah,
know?
for sure.
Let's talk about the premise. This is something that we're going to be talking about a lot in the show. The show is called Die Hard on a Blank. In this movie, it's Die Hard in a skyscraper. Terrorist/thieves sees a skyscraper. Why is that? Is that a strong setup, and if so, why? Like, how do we feel about this in the pantheon of other action?
Like, I think it works really well. I was thinking about how, like, I don't think I personally have a strong geographic sense of the building. I don't think you ever go, oh, I know what floor I'm on right now necessarily. But I think that that's really powerful because there's something nightmarish about this building. It's very, very high in the air. There's glass. You can turn a corner and, like, a terrorist can be there. These boardrooms are, like, just corporatized to all hell. Like, there's a little bit of, like, style in the way that Takagi has, like, certain things set up, but it feels very 80s, and it feels very, like, again, aspirational, and, like, doesn't feel like a place you'd want to hang out.
Yeah, you alluded to why this is a good premise and scenario and situation, or location rather, for an action movie. Yeah, there's a myriad of dangers in this place. It's contained, yet you could fall out, you could fall off the roof. There's the elevator shafts. You know, it's a good arena for
lots of ways
mayhem.
to die,
and it definitely is nightmarish. There's a sort of claustrophobic aspect which
Right.
it leans into with the air shaft sequences and so forth. So, we'll talk about this in more detail with how other movies later on, whether their scenarios succeeded or failed, whether it was a boat, a plane, a bus, what have you.
I can't wait to talk about speed. I can't wait to talk about speed.
Me too.
Oh, man. The ticking clock.
The ticking clock.
What's the ticking clock in the case of this movie? So what we have written down here is it's essentially the plot device, right? So what's the ticking clock?
So I guess in this movie that it's an interesting one, but I think the ticking clock only really kicks in deep in the third act with the realization that the roof is wired with heavy explosives. So the ticking clock,
they're going to kill all the terrorists. The terrorists are going to kill all the hostages.
They're going to kill all the hostages. They're going to blow the roof. But also at that point, I think McClane knows that the helicopters are inbound.
Right.
So they are at risk.
Now we know they're going to do it, right? No, we kind of don't.
Well, McClane, I don't know if McClane knows the full end game of Gruber at that point, but he definitely knows there is some kind of ruse at play, because he says it's a double cross, and then he's intercepted.
One thing that our producer Mike pointed out earlier is that this is a great movie that, screenplay-wise, from the perspective of we find things out before McClane does. Like, we find out that they're not terrorists but thieves earlier than he does. I feel like we kind of know they're going to blow the roof up because we see them setting up the or we know they're up there. We know something's going on the roof. We might come to that realization at the exact same moment as him. But it's a great movie in terms of dramatic irony. You know, things that the audience knows that the characters don't, which, like, super Shakespearean. McTiernan's a Shakespearean, guy, loves Shakespeare. Like, the movie uses some of these things really to its advantage. We know Hans is Hans. McClane might not know Hans is Hans, right? We know all these sort of things that are interesting, that add to the tension in the movie.
Yeah,
we know
suspense.
Thornburg is going to their house.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's an interesting one in that the ticking clock, like in other movies that we'll be talking about, Speed being a great example.
Right.
Ticking clock is established very early on, right? It's the central conceit of the movie.
Right.
The ticking clock is intrinsic to the central conceit.
Or Unstoppable. Is a great example where a train's essentially turned into a
when
bomb.
it's going to in Unstoppable, when it hits that curve, isn't it? That's the point where so whereas in Die Hard, actually the ticking clock is quite subtle and is right towards the end of
we are participating in trying to figure out, like, what's the twist in this movie?
Yeah.
What's the thing that's gonna?
It's an unusual use of this device.
Yeah. But again, it's dramatic. It's I think it's McTiernan's, and listen, not just McTiernan, but, like, he's a dramatist. That's his expertise.
So let's talk about the action. What is your favorite action sequence or scene, and why?
I'm going to put this question back to you.
Oh, okay.
I want to hear from you first.
Cool. For me, I mean, as we talked about the sort of the musical nature of it, the symphonic nature of it, I think a great action movie should be topping itself constantly, and this
Yeah.
movie really does that. It's an amazing blueprint in that regard, because sometimes you'll have an action movie where the best sequences might be in the first act or in the first half or before the third act,
Right.
whereas actually the real classics, Aliens is another great example of a movie that continues to top itself. It's like set piece after set piece after set piece after set piece. It also has a symphonic quality, and the James
that
Horner
movie.
score in that movie is just unbelievable. So for me, to that point, even though I love the SWAT assault and that bringing the car, I love that whole sequence. But for me, my favorite action sequence is the helicopter
The gunship.
insertion sequence. When you see those helicopters going down the street
Yeah.
and that sound,
Yeah.
there's
The sound
something
is
about
amazing.
that, and how it builds and builds and builds to this confluence of circumstances where McClane is trying to get the hostages off the roof. We know it's going to blow. The FBI think he's a terrorist, and they're pretty reckless anyway, so they're trying to kill him. So he's got nowhere to go. If he stays on the roof, he'll either be shot or blown up. And then it all builds to this kind of climactic moment. So for me, that is my favorite action sequence. And I think in a great action movie, you want to save the best for last.
That's a great answer. And I think him jumping off the building is like, holy shit. And I also I can't imagine where we are sort of spoiled with absolutely gonzo action movies now, but I can't imagine what it was like in 1988 to be like, to see this movie and kind of go like, holy shit, they flew helicopters around downtown LA for an action. Like we all take it for granted now, but it had to have been amazing at the time.
And then finally on this, The Anatomy of an Action Movie, the humor and how, I think humor is such an important element of action movies to diffuse some of the more serious moments.
Yeah, because there's some really dark moments in this movie. There's also some very funny moments, and there's some moments that are somewhere in the middle. Like, this is dark. The SWAT team writhing on the ground after the explosion is very, very, very funny. Because they're just all like, ah! And it's just like, and it's such a stupid plan. Like,
Yeah.
this idea is so
it's blunt.
stupid.
It's blunt force trauma.
Yeah, and this movie has a real distrust of these, like, the police. It has a distrust of the FBI. Like, it's not, it never presents any of them as, like, valorous or moral.
It's sort
or
of
any
anti-militaristic in
It's
a way,
very
or like
anti-militaristic.
anti-state power.
Yeah, I
if you like.
totally think so. And I think the antithesis of that is personified in like Al as being the only sensible person on the ground. Is this like this beat cop driving around is the only regular guy. Like, there's no better condemnation of the sort of state thing than the guy saying it's just like fucking Saigon. You're like, oh my
Authorization?
God. Like,
How about the United States fucking government?
Yeah, it's like, you're nuts. You're out of control. And
Yeah.
it's just very like,
It's
again,
like when
it's the
power
way-
goes to your head,
Right.
you make bad decisions.
And
know?
it's almost one thing that makes a more sympathetic character is you're like, the corporations in this movie suck. Like, it's all very fake. The cops all seem to be acting in these bizarre, brutal ways. The FBI is like is comfortable losing 20-25% of the hostages. Of course, Gruber's like, money, desert island, that's all I need, which is, and McClane is just like, I don't want any of this either. I want to be with my kids, like it really sets up this interesting dynamic in that sense.
And the other moment that I wanted to say that just in that sequence that I love, the SWAT assault, is the moment where the cop gets his like arm cut on like a rose thorn or whatever. What a brilliant moment.
Yeah,
of just,
I totally
like,
forgot.
Sort of like,
oh my God,
ah.
yeah, he cuts his finger. Oh, it's so good.
Fantastic.
Meanwhile, McClane has glass up like in his ass, and he's still running around. Yes.
Yeah, it's so delicate, this SWAT team. A wonderful moment.
Oh my God. So this episode's all about Die Hard. I think as part of talking about Die Hard, we should talk about the things that influenced Die Hard. Most obvious one is the fact that this is an adaptation of a book by Roderick Thorpe called Nothing Lasts Forever. I knew this exists. I've never read it. I briefly flirted with like getting it out of the library before we recorded, but truth be told, I didn't have time. I assume you've read it.
I have read it, yeah.
How many times?
Only the once.
That's disappointing to me, Phil. I thought we were going to be like, well, the 10th time I figured this out.
discovered new
A
realizations.
new detail. How is the book Nothing Lasts Forever different from the movie Die Hard?
The main one I would say just is the overall tone. The book is of its time in the sense of the cynical, paranoid thrillers of the 70s. It was almost more in line with the spirit
Like
of
a Parallax
French.
View.
I was going to say, yeah, Parallax View or The Conversation, French
Conversation.
Connection.
Nice.
That kind of bleak ending that's like ambiguous and you're not really sure how you feel about it. It's sort of more real life and messy and that kind of down vibe.
Does it have like the same? Is it McClane? Is McClane the character in it, or is he different? Is he
Character
similar?
is called Joe Leland, who is an ex-cop turned security consultant. He's much older. He goes to the skyscraper, which
In
is for
LA,
an oil,
is it in LA?
In LA on Wilshire Boulevard. They're called Claxon Oil, and it's his daughter, not his wife. The wife is actually dead. She's called Karen, and he goes to see his daughter Stephanie Gennaro for her Christmas party.
Oh, so she's taken her mom's. She has her mom's last name, not his name.
It's her married name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's married.
So she's married. So the setup and the basic kind of the skeleton of it, the infrastructure of the story is very, very close. But the attitude, the characters, some of the characters have remained. The ones that I was most interested in were actually the differences and the similarities is Dwayne Robinson and Al Powell. So Dwayne Robinson does feature, and there's a wonderful quote where he describes this. This really speaks to the attitude we were talking about, the anti-authoritarian or anti-authority attitude. This is from the book. It says, civilization was full of Dwayne Robinsons, seeing everything that happened to them as opportunities for their own advancement and aggrandizement. They were the spoilers of society, with Richard Nixon being at the top of the list.
See, this is wow.
The book is incredibly dark, and in particular, the ending. There's two elements of the ending that I thought were fascinating that really speak to the difference in kind of tonal approach. First is that in the final showdown, when Joe Leland confronts Gruber, and the character is called Gruber, he's called Little Tony the Red. Anton Gruber. He is a radical leftist terrorist, so he does have a political agenda. When eventually it gets to the showdown, and the watch is actually in there too. That device is set up. Gruber pulls his daughter off the building with him, and so his daughter dies, which is a pretty heavy
That's
ending,
a heavy ending.
and very in keeping with this kind of like French Connection type vibe of like, oh, that's a deeply uncomfortable 70s feeling, which was not palatable in the 80s,
Right.
especially for a summer blockbuster or really any movie,
Right.
unless you want to say the original First Blood where Rambo was supposed to die. But
Sounds like they like
changed it.
sanded off some of the hard edges for the movie
Absolutely,
version. But it's
they
still there.
took
It's there in the DNA.
Yeah, but they certainly took the DNA. They certainly took the framework of it. But the other big difference that was fascinating to me was that with Carl comes back, the same thing happens. The same beat is played. But at this point, Joe Leland is trying to make his way out of the building. It ends up being this messy showdown with Dwayne Robinson and Al Powell pulls Dwayne Robinson into the line of fire. Carl kills Robinson, and then Al Powell shoots Carl, and then he tells Joe Leland, like, hey, just so we're clear, like, Dwayne Robinson died as a hero.
Ooh.
So it's super
Man, was
cynical.
Roderick Thorpe okay? What's the deal?
But
Yeesh.
I will tell it is a terrific book.
It's a good book.
It's like I read it in 2 sittings. It's short, it's lean, it's so hard-boiled, it's crisp. It's a fantastic book, a great adventure story.
So, like, this is not the first appearance of Joe Leland in a
right.
book, right?
That's right. So there was a previous book called The Detective that was made into a film with Frank Sinatra, where you meet Joe Leland and he's a detective in New York. I think The Detective, which is basically a meat and potatoes procedural for Frank, where it's a more serious part. He was sold as an adult look at a police detective.
Oh, interesting.
It's similarly cynical, and it's about him navigating the politics of New York Police Department and the politics of the city and trying to kind of walk a straight line in a crooked world. For me, the best way I would say I would frame it is it's almost like John McClane's dad. You know, he kind of plays like he's a tough New York cop who doesn't play by the political rules and butts heads with his captain, and that feels very McClane. But so that's where maybe the DNA seeped in. But and also he's a second generation cop, he says. So there's a feeling like the lineage of being cops is part of this whole tradition with the
Right.
McClane character and whatnot.
And
it was like passed on father to son.
How old was Frank Sinatra when he was in The Detective? Probably.
It was 68
So-
when the movie was made, so
Jeez.
he's probably
40s,
Yeah,
I would guess,
say.
like mid to late 40s.
Yeah,
I bring that up only because he was offered or had to be contractually offered the part in Die Hard.
That's right. And
to play
and
John McClane in his 60s.
That's right. Because the character in the book was originally older, but Frank Sinatra said, quote, "I'm too old and too rich." So he let everybody off the hook. He understood. He didn't want to be running around getting his feet cut
at the risk of, I don't know that it works with Sinatra. And Willis is like 35, right?
So when he was adapting the novel, the screenwriter, the first screenwriter to develop the project, Jeb Stewart, he had this eureka moment because he was a young guy. He was about the age. He was like in his mid-30s. He'd had an argument with his wife. He had a young couple of young kids, trying to provide for his family, dealing with those kind of life stresses. Had a big argument because he was stressed out. Nearly had an accident on the freeway. Nearly died. Luckily he didn't. And that was his light bulb moment where he was like, this is not about a 65-year-old guy. This is about a 35-year-old guy who had an argument with his wife, should have said sorry, didn't, and then really bad shit happened.
I love that because it's like the like sort of impetus or the seed for the movie is so relatable to anyone who like lives a normal life. Who's like, I got to provide for my family, I got to do all these things. Like, it sort of grounds the movie in reality, which at the end of the day, the whole story is kind of about a guy reconciling with his wife. And through sort of an extraordinary circumstance and situation.
And to this point, I mean, when they were exploring the earlier version of it, before they made that realization, they were looking at the older action stars like Clint Eastwood and Paul Newman, who I think turned it down because he'd pretty much done something similar in Towering Inferno, running around a building that was on fire. And a lot of the imagery from Towering Inferno, actually, there's an interesting story about that because Roderick Thorpe saw Towering Inferno, had a dream about being pursued by gunmen in a skyscraper, and then conceived Nothing Lasts Forever.
Die Hard is sort of based on a nightmare that Roderick Thorpe had after seeing the Towering Inferno. Have you ever seen the Towering Inferno?
Yes.
I've never seen it.
I watched it recently to place it in this context. It's a completely different story. It actually, in my opinion, it feels there's certain movies from the 70s, even like one that's directly relevant, Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3, that came out the same year.
Great movie.
That feels super contemporary, whereas Towering Inferno to me feels very dated.
Sort
of
of dated.
Its time.
Yeah.
It's a very kind of like unhip movie.
Yeah.
But I would say the only DNA that made its way in, obviously you got the skyscraper, a fiery skyscraper and helicopters, and the building itself has a kind of personality in the way that Nakatomi Plaza does. But there are some specific...
It's almost like a character in the movie.
A character in the movie, yeah. And there are some specific shots in Towering Inferno of like the elevator shafts that are almost directly in Die Hard. So it's not a direct influence in terms of story shape or anything like that or characters, but I think it was certainly a direct influence on Roderick Thorpe.
Huh. Cool. So Phil, is Die Hard a Christmas movie?
This is a huge kind of I've got a huge detailed deposition about this. Yes, of course.
Yes,
it fucking
is. It's a Christmas movie.
Of course
it is. This conversation. It makes no sense. Yes, it's a Christmas.
Who's
it
having
ends
this
with
debate?
Let It Snow.
Who is having this debate? Who thinks differently?
And the Run DMC song.
Yeah,
okay,
exactly.
moving on.
Moving
Let's
on.
wrap up this.
So, although Die Hard was actually nominated for Oscars, action movies rarely receive recognition from the Academy in what might be considered the major category. So we want to put things straight and have our own action movie Academy Awards, aka the Die Hard Oscars.
Let's wrap this up with the Die Hard Oscars.
Yes.
Do we need to put on shirts and tuxedos? Or can we just keep wearing the clothes?
It's casual.
Do you think it's casual?
It's casual.
It's a casual award. It's like the early Academy Awards where everybody was drunk and it was on like a Sunday afternoon. All right, I'll kick us off. So here's what we're going to do. We got 4 awards. We're going to go one by one. We'll list the nominees, winners for this category. We have not discussed this before, so let's see what we get out of it. Okay, the first Oscar, Die Hard Oscar, the John McClane Yippee-Ki-Yay Motherfucker Award for Best Singer. What's the best singer in this movie?
I mean, I'm big. The nominees for me would be No Shit Lady. Does it sound like I'm ordering a pizza?
Fucking, yeah.
Now I have a machine gun. Ho.
Okay.
Of course, Yippee-Ki-Yay, motherfucker. Shoot the Glass.
That's a good one.
My personal favorite.
Is that a zinger? Is Shoot the Glass a zinger?
Yeah, you're right.
That's a good question.
Is it
Because it's not like
ineligible?
I don't think it's. I think, and this is a good talk. A zinger is sort of a line that finishes a scene or lifts the humor. A button.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
It's a button. And Shoot the Glass, though it is arguably my favorite line in the movie, I don't think constitutes a zinger. I think
Great
your other
point.
choices are zingers.
Great
I think they're
point.
really, really good.
That's Shoot the Glass has been cancelled. My personal favorite, my vote would go to the line that's actually also in the book, albeit in a different place of the film. Geronimo, motherfucker.
What does he say, Geronimo?
It's when he throws the chair down.
Oh, that's good.
The chair of explosives.
I have to go. It's obvious, but I have to go with "Come Out to the Coast." We'll have a few laughs. Classic
Great
line.
choice.
The Hans Gruber Exceptional Thief Award for scene stealing.
My nominees are, of course, Hans Gruber.
Sure. Which one? Which scene?
Just every scene.
I think the Bill Clay scene. That's a pretty good scene.
Yeah,
scene.
that's next level acting.
Oh, God.
We're doing a German doing an American accent,
Yeah,
but it still has some of the
very-
German in it. It's pretty
It's pretty
sophisticated.
good, yeah.
Pole vaulting. Hans Gruber, Al Powell, Uli the candy thief,
Uli the Candy Thief.
the SWAT cop who gets cut by the thorn, and Argyle.
Go. I want to hear your choice.
I think he's the clues in the name. It's got to be just Gruber. I think it's Gruber. And I think
Gruber
you're right. I think that is the scene stealing, just like next level crazy gymnastics as an actor.
I'm going to go with every scene that Theo is in. Actually, I'm going to give you a very specific example. I think when he's defensive coordinating, that's a really great scene. But I think the most scene-stealing moment in the movie is one of the funniest. When Gruber says, "Now you can hack the vault." And he says, "You didn't bring me along for my charming personality," which is like such a great, I immediately know who this guy is line. So that's my pick. The Dick Thornburg Award for Dick of the Movie.
So our nominees are Dick Thornburg himself, Dwayne T. Robinson, Ellis, Agent Johnson, Special Agent Johnson, and the LAPD dispatcher who tries to cite McClane for misuse of the police radio.
Ooh, very good. What's your pick?
For this one, I think it's Dwayne Robinson.
Phil, I have a question though. Can it be anyone besides Dick Thornburg if the award is named
You're
after
putting
him?
me on the spot. I was just trying to be clever, but I
Yeah.
think you're right that maybe,
You think it should be Dick Thornburg?
But this is an unusual action movie in the sense that there's a plethora of dicks.
There's a lot of dicks in this movie. My pick is not Dick Thornburg. It's Harvey, the newscaster, because there's so much to talk about this movie, but the newscast stuff is brilliant. It's like Paul Verhoeven satire level good. But my favorite bit is when he says Stockholm is in Norway. What does he say?
As in Helsinki, Sweden.
What does he say? Yeah, he says it's in Sweden, and the guy's like, Finland. It's just great dickish idiot behavior. Also, eat it, Harvey. And then Harvey's like staring death eyes at Thornburg, and he's live on the 10 o'clock news. It's great. Best Death Award.
Our nominees for the best death are Tony's neck break,
Ooh,
Marco being shot in the boardroom under the table,
yeah.
the FBI guy's helicopter crash, Al Powell killing Carl, and
Ooh.
Hans Gruber's fall. So, did you have a pick?
Yeah, it's Marco. Oh, it's absolutely Marco. I actually now think this conversation has led me to believe that Marco getting shot from under the table is my favorite moment in the entire movie, because I am so into how fucking unhinged Marco. No more table. Like, it's just loses his mind, and I just that might be my favorite scene in the movie, and a great zinger. Thanks for the advice. After
Agreed.
he's blown him to pieces. Your pick?
I think I've got to go with Hans before that shot.
The music
And
is amazing.
his expression and the technical achievement of that shot. It looks so real, and it is so real, and the acting is real, and it's just it's a haunting death, and even reappears in Die Hard with a Vengeance. They re-show that moment.
Yeah, which is one of my favorite moments in Die Hard.
It stays with you. Okay. Just because I really want to say this, that now it's time to play Double Jeopardy trivia, fun facts quiz.
So you're going to quiz me.
And
Because
I'm going to
have
quiz
not
you.
been
Yes,
prepped
I'm going
on
to quiz
these.
you.
This is
That's
outrageous.
why it'll be good. That's why it's good.
This interview's over.
This is where the scores can really change. Which notable director was offered the movie first? I can give
Paul
you.
Verhoeven?
Yes. Nailed it. Wow. That's
Thank you. Do you have any
highly
idea
impressive.
why he didn't do it?
I think he was just getting offered everything. After
Well, it's also
RoboCop.
interesting that Jan de Bont shot it, which would make me think that maybe Paul Verhoeven brought him on, and then
Yeah.
Jan de Bont hung
Well,
on.
actually, McTiernan loved The Fourth Man, apparently, so he loved that style.
Who doesn't love
Yeah.
The Fourth Man?
When he got the part in Die Hard, Bruce Willis was primarily known as a television actor, but which other 80s TV stars were purportedly offered the role of John McClane?
You have a great the guy you never see but asks the questions on trivia shows voice. I just want to let you know. Paul Newman?
A TV actor.
Oh, TV
so
actor.
80s TV actors.
Can I like
throw
one
a
hint?
guess.
One hint?
Actually, Bruce Willis was in a show with one of these guys that was a very
Sybil Shepherd.
popular. Not that would have been an interesting choice.
Oh, I'd watch the hell out of that
There was
movie.
a certain show set in Florida about cops.
Miami Vice. Wait, who? Who was it?
Don Johnson
Don Johnson.
and MacGyver.
Richard Dean
was
Anderson?
apparently in the running.
He's too clean. Richard Dean Anderson's too clean to kill all these guys.
But he would have been good with the gizmos.
He would have been good with the gizmos,
Yeah.
but it's not the same. It's just not the same.
No, it would have been not great.
I love Richard Dean Anderson. All right.
Which Australian actor, who would later play the lead in another huge summer blockbuster, was apparently approached about the role of Hans Gruber first?
Paul Hogan. No, I'm just kidding.
It's not The Crocodile Hunter.
It's not The Crocodile Hunter. Australian actor had a big role in...
Another huge summer blockbuster that came out, I'll give you the clue, in 1993.
Oh, shit. I'm really annoyed because I feel like you're going to tell me this and I'm going to be very angry at myself. Who?
Sam Neill.
Sam Neill was offered a part.
I don't know if he was offered, but he was approached. So that's kind of interesting.
To play John McClane?
To play Gruber.
To play Gruber. Okay.
You can kind of see that.
You can totally see it.
Yeah, you can see it, right? I mean, look, Richmond's untouchable, but...
I mean, there's like, it would be a softer... It'd be a softer kind of performance.
But he played Damien in The Omen,
He played
hadn't he?
Damien in The
Yeah,
Omen,
yeah.
and he's in Possession, which if you've never seen, Possession is one of the most wild movies ever made. Okay.
All right, last two. Which Die Hard actor has a close relative who is also in The Detective?
I have no idea.
Hart Bochner, who plays Ellis. His dad, Lloyd, has a great role.
I thought of Ellis, but I was trying to think like Hollywood royalty, anything like that. Damn it!
And our last one, the Pacific Courier logo, which is on the terrorist truck, also features in two other notable action movies, both from the 1990s. It's kind of an in-joke from the production designer. Can you guess either of those?
Well, I would imagine that they would have to be LA set movies, right?
They actually, one of them is.
I'm looking at our notes from later on. Is One Lethal Weapon 2?
No, good guess.
Speed.
It's in Speed, and it's also in Die Hard with a Vengeance.
Oh,
one of the
which
trucks
is
that
funny
blows
'cause
up at the beginning.
That's one of the great New York movies. Well, it's clear we don't like Die Hard. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate that
There's
we're
not much to talk about.
Lukewarm film. No, it's great. It really is like, are we going to be able to top this? Talking about a million other action movies, because this is the great action movie.
I am so
excited
excited to talk about it because I love all action movies, good, bad, ugly. I love them all. I want to treat them all with the same level of love and respect. Not every episode is going to be like this, where there's this much depth. But Die Hard is the daddy.
It deserves it.
It deserves this kind of discussion, of a deep dive, I think. And I could not be more excited to go on this adventure, on this exploration journey with you, to look at how Die Hard's DNA found its way into all these other incredible action movies. Some are bona fide classics, and we've talked about some of them already. But actually, the 80s and the 90s in particular was a real golden age.
The heyday of action
movies. And
Yeah.
we're going to get into them all one by one, and we're going to track how Die Hard's DNA affected them and ran through the genre.
Fantastic. I love it. Well, Phil, this has been a blast. It's good to see you as always. We'll be back next time with some new FBI.
Yeah,
It's hard
that's
to get
great. It's
through.
great. I
All
love
right.
it.
We'll be back next time with some new FBI guys. Die Hard on a Blank is a podcast created and hosted by Philip Gawthorne. Liam Billingham co-hosts and produces the show. Mike Mayer and Michael Sugar are the executive producers. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at DieHardOAB. Rate, review, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Most importantly, tell your movie podcast-loving friends about Die Hard on a Blank. Special thanks to Suki Chu. See you next time on Die Hard on a Blank.
To the teachers, assistants, and support staff who see potential in every child, Grand Canyon University recognizes you. We created the National Center for Teacher Preparation at GCU, along with a generous scholarship, so you can become a licensed teacher with paid benefits. Over 100 GCU alumni have been recognized award recipients, including Superintendent, Administrator, and Teacher of the Year. Find your purpose at Grand Canyon University. Private, Christian, affordable. Visit gcu.edu/parapro.